Hi, I'm Tom Payton, Director and Publisher at Trinity University Press. We, along with the Northern Rockies Conservation Cooperative, are so happy you could join us tonight to celebrate and discuss the new book, The Artist's Field Guide to Yellowstone. As a nonprofit cultural and educational publisher, we are committed to an evolving agenda of work that engages, questions, and brings us together as a community in effective and productive ways. We're here to discuss Greater Yellowstone's natural history, storytelling, and the arts with contributing writers Susan Marsh and Todd Wilkinson, contributing artists Sue Cedarholm and Dwayne Hardy, as well as Katie Christiansen, the book's editor. The discussion will be led by Ben Williamson. Ben Williamson is the executive director of the Northern Rockies Conservation Cooperative, where they seek to connect ecological, social, and policy approaches to better understand the root causes of environmental problems. Prior to the NRCC, Ben directed an education center in Glacier North National Park, worked on reducing predator livestock conflicts in Northwest Montana, and facilitated dialogue about land use in Ghana. He received a Master of Environmental Management degree at the Yale School of the Environment and a Bachelor of Science degree in Ecology from the University of Montana. Ben will be introducing our participants tonight. You can purchase The Artist's Guide to Yellowstone using the link you'll see on the screen as well as in the chat box. Use the promo code NRCC20 and 20% of the proceeds will be donated to the Northern Rockies Conservation Cooperative. Thank you all for joining us. And with that, I'll hand it off to Ben.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Tom. And I'd like to send my appreciation back to Trinity University Press for your role in this project. As you mentioned, here at NRCC, our mission statement is conservation for the common good. And so what that means is finding ways to integrate knowledge and skills, whether that be through the arts, science, policy, or education, to ultimately improve management and policy decisions. All of our more than 50 research associates and experts and residents are working in this interdisciplinary way. Storytelling is one of those means, and the book that Katie has put together is really an example of this core philosophy, bringing together a network of people, in this case, writers and artists, to share the way that they find meaning in the biophysical world. So in this book, we learn about what sort of species and landscapes are found and represented here in the GYE, but more importantly, we learn about how we as humans, one species amongst many with many different lenses of seeing, make sense of and shape our own values out of the complexity that surrounds us. Katie translates those different ways for seeing in this book. So in this next hour, Katie will introduce the origins of this project. We'll have a discussion with our 4 contributors, and we'll end with a short Q&A. So throughout the session, I encourage attendees to send in questions to the Q&A, and we will hopefully get to those at the end. So with that, I will begin with an introduction of Katie. Katie is an artist, writer, conservationist, and mother. She has lived in the GYE for most of the last decade between Bozeman and Jackson, though she's currently based in Boulder, Colorado. Katie's work can be summed up as building bridges across differences by engaging communities around shared values in nature. One example of such a project is her work at Story Mill Community Park in Bozeman, in which she collaborated with local groups and community partners to design, write, and paint interpretive panels that can be found throughout the park. Katie is also the artist in residence here at NRCC, and while here, she has been awarded 2 National Endowment for the Arts grants for development of interpretive resources in GYE natural areas, including Story Mill Park and Astoria Park Conservancy, which is just south of Jackson. Along with her artwork, Katie has worked with environmental NGOs for most of her career, spanning science, policy, management, education, and outreach. And she has worked with groups including the Trust for Public Land, National Geographic, the Wild Foundation, Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, and AMB West Ranches. Katie received a master's from the Yale School of the Environment, where she co-taught Yale courses on Yellowstone and global change. With what free time she has left, I don't know how she finds time. She enjoys trail running, climbing, hiking, and nature journaling. These days, her exploration keeps her closer to home, watching birds with her young son and awaiting a new baby arriving this summer. So with that, I am pleased to introduce the editor, Katie Christiansen, and I will pass it off to her to kick off the rest of the night.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you, Tom, too, for the introductions. And really just thank you everyone who's here tonight. It's incredible to see that 75 of you have taken an hour out of your lives to spend together in conversation. I want to mention that we can turn the screen share presentation off for a moment, Bridget, if you're able to. And thanks everybody for sticking with us on some of the technical difficulties we've been having here and getting started a couple minutes late. We are going to try to conclude by 7, so fingers crossed. It is a momentous occasion, which brings us together tonight, which is the celebration of the release of this book that I'm holding in my hands. And as many of you listening tonight know, this is an occasion years in the making. Also, many of you listening tonight know that you were instrumental in bringing this to life. And so I want to start this evening by thanking you. I wish I could do this thanks in person, but we'll make the most of Zoom. I want to start by thanking the contributors. So the contributors are the 50 artists and writers who were so generous with their time and attention to contribute their artwork and writing to this project. What I'm honored by is that you took time out of the other work that you do on behalf of Yellowstone to be a part of this little project that, you know, years ago was an idea and has finally come to fruition tonight. I'm so grateful to be in your company, and it's exciting to see many of you here tonight. I also want to just, one more little tech thing is Dwayne, I'm sorry to point this out, but if it's possible for you to mute, I think it's causing some video issues. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Dwayne is one of our contributors who I'll be introducing later this evening. You guys will get to meet him soon. I'd also like to thank the Northern Rockies Conservation Cooperative, Ben representing us here tonight from NRCC. I'd also like specifically to thank Peyton Griffin and Susan Clark, but really the NRCC community in general has just been a constant and reliable supporter of this project. And I'm so thankful to be within that community and thankful to be presenting to this community finally a finished product. It's really exciting. And next to Trinity University Press, thank you all so much for believing in this idea years ago and for seeing it through despite hurdle after hurdle, including if it could get much worse than a global pandemic. Let's hope it doesn't. But even then, you saw this project through. You took the time to care and to understand what the origins of this project were, so that this book that resulted really is a reflection of the intentions that went into this. And I'm so grateful for your partnership. Finally, I'd like to thank the family and friends, and you all know who you are. Many of you are listening tonight, who continue to encourage and support me and the people around this project to keep at it. And without you all, I'm not sure that we'd be all here today. So I'm humbled to be in your company as well, and I'm moved by your kindness and your love. I created the Artist Field Guide to Yellowstone years ago now in celebration of Greater Yellowstone, in celebration of its wildlife, its community of passionate artists and writers, and its legacy as this really unique place in the world where wild nature coexists with human communities. And while we celebrate all of those things tonight, we're also, of course, celebrating the book written about this place. And so I'd like to spend the next few minutes sharing about how this book came to be, what it represents, as well as together view some of the pieces that were created for this project. And now, as we continue on, we are going to be viewing some of the artwork that was created for this project. So I'll let one piece get loaded up here. And I hope you all enjoy this little moment of diving into the book with me. When I reflect on the origins of this project, I think of formative experiences in Greater Yellowstone's wild nature. I think of time spent sketching an owl pellet in my field notebook. of encountering a pair of pronghorns in the National Elk Refuge, of combing through guidebooks to identify birds, and of sitting riverside late into summer days, watching trout rise from glimmering water and wondering how I might capture and convey this beauty. Because if others could see and know this place as I did, then we would surely all agree that this wild is worth protecting. So, as I imagine is true for most books about the natural world, this book's origin story plays out in nature and in my sheer wonder in and reverence for Yellowstone's wild. When I reflect on the process of this project, I think of the people. I think of the hundreds of hikes and coffees, phone calls and emails with 50 artists and writers I truly admire and who generously gave their time and attention to telling their story of Yellowstone through their artwork and writing. The pages of this book are filled with these stories, each crafted brushstroke by brushstroke and one word at a time. Together, these stories tell a layered narrative of Greater Yellowstone that provides readers with meaningful opportunities to connect with this place, its wildness, and its people. Greater Yellowstone, like any inch of the world, offers a landscape for making meaning in one's life. This book offers stories to help make sense of this landscape in ways that are aligned with a sustainable future for human and wild communities alike. And if I can say so myself, this book is beautiful. We took care to create and design a book so that in its simple beauty, it reflects the aesthetics of the ecosystem itself. I believe art, which conveys the beauty of the natural world, can serve as a foundation for building values around ecologically rich systems. From an initial capture of curiosity through its beauty, the book provides a pathway for readers to connect with a deeper sense of their place within nature. And I'd like to take a couple minutes to show you how this weaving together of art, writing, and natural history plays out on the pages of this book. I know some of you listening tonight may already have the book in your hands, which is incredible. And if that's the case, I encourage you to follow along. So let's first open our books to the pica, which is on pages 20 and 21. This bold and colorful pica painting was done by contemporary Native American artist D.G. House. For me, as I view her painting, I feel a drumming of energy from the tiny but vivacious pica. D.G. has created a pica that feels truly alive here on the page. This is a pica that takes up space. And opposite her painting is a poem by Lynn Dalebout, a legendary Yellowstone wordsmith who has created a war cry for the Ochitona princeps, which is the scientific name for the pica. Her poem is entitled As Above, So Below. She begins, "We are called the Ochitona, creatures of purpose and place. No hibernation, no migration. Our purpose to stay in one place." Lynn gives voice to the pica in a rhythmic call that, like DG's painting, plays like a drumbeat and registers with fierceness and solidarity. Her poem goes on. From lichen-crested perch, hear our whiskered whistlings, alerting chirps as we harvest our hay. Bookending these two powerful pica tributes are more traditional natural history tellings of the species. A small illustrated pica looking across the centerfold toward a lupin, a favorite meal. The left sidebar shares how a reader might find themselves in the company of this little powerhouse. In mountainous terrain, listen for a shrill mewing chirp to locate a round-eared, short-tailed pica, swiftly darting across talus slopes. Next, let's move on to pages 78 and 79, where we meet the quaking aspen. Kelsey Sather is a Bozeman-based writer and outdoor athlete who wrote a hauntingly beautiful essay, which she entitled To Quake. In her words, to quake, they say, is to shake and tremble. But I see the aspens dancing with wind, their canopies a chorus of greens. I see the aspens dancing in the fall, gales inspiring their golden leaves to sway and spin and shimmer. A shimmering and swaying golden aspen leaf hangs precariously from S.J. Carico's accompanying artwork. Sarah is a Harvard research scientist who conducts her fieldwork in Greater Yellowstone. She is also an artist, reflecting her insights, her knowledge, her hopes and fears into artworks like this piece. If you look closely at the roots of her aspen stand, you might just see a little hidden surprise. Sarah encouraged me to illustrate a goldenrod crab spider for this page, a spider she has found nesting in fallen, rolled up aspen leaves. At the conclusion of Kelsey's essay, she leaves us with this message. I am told that to quake as a human is to shudder with fear. But then there is the quaking aspen, whispering us to dance, to celebrate the connectivity we may not be able to see, to let go of our dualisms, to let go of the illusion of separateness, to let go of fear and dance, even when we do not know what will come from our small existence. And we can take it off slideshow for a moment. And Dwayne, I'll mention one more time, I'm sorry, if it's possible to mute, that would be excellent.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the book yet, and if those were intriguing pieces, I hope you'll pick up a copy. The book is full of these layered stories of Yellowstone's wildlife, told by the 50 contributing artists and writers who call this place home and who really have dedicated their lives to telling Yellowstone stories. Tonight, we are so lucky to be joined by 4 of the book's esteemed contributors. Each of these contributor pairs work together, much like we just saw, to undertake the presentation of one of Yellowstone's iconic species of flora or fauna. Artist Sue Cedarholm and writer Susan Marsh paired up to tell the story of the Lodgepole Pine, and artist Dwayne Hardy and writer Todd Wilkinson collaborated to reveal new perspectives on the wolf. We will be speaking with each artist and writer pair on their experience creating this book, how living in Greater Yellowstone shapes their art and writing, and how their storytelling can help to shape Greater Yellowstone's future. As mentioned by Ben earlier, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box and we'll try to get to some of those at the end. So first up, we're going to be speaking with Todd and Dwayne. And it looks like Dwayne, unfortunately, who's been having some technical issues, we lost him. I bet he'll sign back in, but in the meantime, let me provide bios for these 2 gentlemen. Todd Wilkinson is an American journalist and author whose work has appeared in a wide variety of national publications, ranging from National Geographic and Christian Science Monitor to the Washington Post, on topics of environment, art, culture, and business. He is the founder of Mountain Journal, which serves as both a journalistic watchdog and celebrant of Greater Yellowstone. Todd lives in Bozeman and has assignments taking him around the world, but foremost loves writing about and exploring the vast Greater Yellowstone ecosystem that begins just outside of town. Dwayne Hardy lives in Victor, Idaho, and is the artist in residence at the Murie Center in Grand Teton National Park. He has been creating paintings and dioramas for 35 years, including a recent commission from the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. Over the span of 3 years, Dwayne traveled across the Rocky Mountain wilderness for the project Yellowstone to Yukon, A Journey of Wildlife and Art, which was a collaboration between the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, the White Museum of the Canadian Rockies in Banff, Canada, and the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. Todd and Dwayne, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And before I begin with some questions, I have asked Todd to share an excerpt from his piece. And as he's reading it, what we get to look at here, back at the wolf, please, is the painting that Dwayne created for the book, which is entitled Soul of the Wilderness. Todd, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Before I jump in, I just want to say what an extraordinary thing Miss Katie Christiansen has done, and through her publisher, Trinity. I mean, it truly is extraordinary to have a volume, an art book added to the canon of books about Yellowstone National Park, and having something that's novel and substantive And before I jump into my essay, I just want to mention one thing. It's really essential that we realize that Greater Yellowstone isn't just another place. It has Yellowstone as its heart, but it is the last place left standing in the lower 48 with all of its major mammals. And when we think about this roster of mammals and avifauna and plants, and we're lucky to be joined by this superb naturalist, Susan Marsh, tonight. We need to remember that all of these major species that we think are so abundant today nearly all winked out. And in my case, I was able to be here. Few of us remember anymore, our kids certainly don't, that once upon a time wolves were completely gone. And so I want you to just think about things tonight as you listen to these very talented folk talk about this stuff of imagine stripping away these animals piece by piece of what we would lose. So Katie, thank you much for persevering and really bringing this forward. Woof. The call from behind me, up higher on the mountain, a vocalization delivered quickly, yet impossible to untangle from the roaring decibel of wind. I was hiking solo in one of many towering spur ranges of the Northern Rockies that spirals like a spoke out of Yellowstone National Park. Again, it came. Woof. Not as a bark or a primordial blood-chilling howl, but as a glancing, unmenacing missive to let me know that it, the lone wolf, was above on the ridge. I looked, caught sight, and then it was gone. The only time I've encountered a lobo outside of the refuge in the West, where its kind had been restored. I was not afraid, but intrigued after I ascended and found its tracks.
Thank you, Todd. We can go off the beautiful painting that Dwayne did. Todd, I have to say, every time I read your piece, which I've done dozens of times now, I have chills that run up and down my spine. And yet I haven't been able to give that guttural voice to the wolf that you just did. So I appreciate you really leaning into that and giving us a peek into what that was like to be there and have that experience. Dwayne is hoping to call back in soon, but in the meantime, Todd, you and I can be in conversation here. Todd, obviously you have tirelessly pursued conservation ends through your work as a writer. It looks like Dwayne just signed on. Perfect timing, Dwayne.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just saying that you and Todd both have tirelessly pursued conservation ends. You, of course, as an artist, Todd as a writer. I'd love to understand better what motivates this pursuit and how you see yourself presenting ideas about nature through your art and writings, respectively. And Todd, why don't we start with you?
So for me, it comes down to rareness versus commonness. And often we don't reflect upon the fact of this very special thing that we have. And it doesn't just belong to us as human residents. It belongs to a country, but it belongs to the world. But even more than that, it belongs to the animals that live there. And I like to think of wildness as wildness means a place for wild critters that have really winked out from other places can still manage to persevere. Given the fact, the track record out there of what's been lost, it's so breathtaking that when you sit and you think about it, you think about this place that there's not another one over the hill. This isn't like an urgency of a conservation group sending out a missive saying, oh my God, send me $5 or we're going to lose the ecosystem. This is a matter of, like Dave Halleck, the former Yellowstone science chief, said, that the threats are death by 10,000 scratches. And I think if all of us are part of the problem, and I think that all of us are part of the solution, and for me, that's where hope lies. And it's really where the power of art resides, because, you know, you can be a Democrat or a Republican, but you stand in front of a great work of art and the politics go away. So this is part of the thing that motivates me.
Mm. Thank you, Todd. Dwayne, what are your thoughts about that question?
Wow. Well, I've known Todd for many years, and I could hardly top that. But from my tiny little corner of the world as an artist, I view what I do as a deliverer of a message, of a bridge that helps with greater understanding. And in so many cases throughout history, art has provided that visual narrative to lead people to a more profound understanding, which of course I think Todd would agree. And in our case, as a writer and me as an artist, at least I'm speaking for myself, I bow my head to the scientists who provide guideposts along the way to ensure that these landscapes and the wild creatures that inhabit them are managed carefully and responsibly, so that we have them on into the future. So I view what I do in terms of the conservation world as a catalyst, a visual catalyst, to pique people's interest, and hopefully that leads them to a more elevated sense of the reality of the science that's needed to ensure the longevity of our landscapes and our animals.
Mm. Well, that's really well articulated, Dwayne, and it leads well into this next question that I have for you and Todd both, which is differentiating yourselves as artists and writers from the other people in Yellowstone and beyond who are also translating nature for us. So scientists, like you mentioned, policymakers. And what I'm interested in knowing is your take on how the role of the artist and writer is similar or different from the roles of these other nature translators, and in particular how Yellowstone's artists and writers are uniquely positioned to tell the stories of this place. And Dwayne, why don't you start us off there?
Well, in terms of the identity, the global identity of Yellowstone, I believe it acts as a masthead. Everybody knows of Yellowstone. And by virtue of that fact, it's often looked to through all types of media and the arts, literature, as more commonly talked about, known about, and the research that's involved leads, I suppose, in a certain way, the most recent quote unquote cutting edge science that is being, it's ever evolving, but it's being utilized in a park like Yellowstone to bring us right up to date with what the possibilities are to ensure the longevity of the landscape and the creatures. So you can hardly talk about conservation globally without mentioning Yellowstone. I'll leave the rest to Todd. He's more articulate in that way.
Do you want me to jump in?
Please, Todd. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, one thing we would, of course, be remiss without saying that Yellowstone itself is an artificial construct, and that it was a homeland for, or had connections to 26, at least, different indigenous tribes. Who knew it? And that said, I'd like everybody to think about this, because all of my esteemed colleagues here are part of this group. Really, all of us who are tuned in. You don't have to be a writer or an artist to do it. Everybody makes a contribution. But imagine being in 1870, before there were cell phones or TVs or magazines that had, color photographs. And imagine, that this steamroller called Manifest Destiny is rolling across the West. a relative handful of people have seen Yellowstone, and you have limited time to act, and time is of the essence. And so imagine not having any sort of visual reference point for Yellowstone National Park. And then along comes Thomas Moran, his fantastical watercolors, and William Henry Jackson, the pioneering black and white photographer. And suddenly you have the impact of art. You have a US Congress, some of whom were reticent, thought the idea was, preposterous to be protecting land like this. It was this novel thing. And so it's a game changer. Everybody here is part of that game-changing thing. I don't really differentiate what I do from scientists. I think we're all advocates, and I think that's something that we should embrace wholeheartedly. And in my case, my humble case, it's my job just not to screw up great material.
Todd, I don't think that that's what anybody else thinks of you. I appreciate your humility, but I think you guys both alluded to this in your first, and the answer to the first question is that there is this emotional connection that can come out of art and writing that is unique from the way that people connect to a scientific report or, a bill that's going before the legislature. And so on that note, I'd really like to just drill down on what Dwayne and Todd, you both created for this book, and the emotional response that elicits in each other, knowing, Todd and Dwayne, that you both go back probably a long way as friends and collaborators. So my question for you, Todd, first, and then Dwayne for you next. But Todd, what do you understand and learn about Dwayne and his perspectives on nature as you view his wolf painting?
So I've known Dwayne for 30 something years, and he came on my radar screen for his work on dioramas across the country. Most recently, he had an installation at the Smithsonian. So, he's this guy from Saskatchewan who tries to downplay himself, but he really follows within this tradition. Many people know of Carl Rungus. The largest public collection in the United States is at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson Hole. And Rungus is known as the greatest large mammal painter in North America who ever lived. And so Rungus was really out documenting. Those early folk were out documenting things before they went away. Think about that. And so Dwayne is following in this tradition, particularly this mass media age, where his images, he's out there celebrating not just this iconic megafauna, and I'm so happy that you were able to get smaller critters, and let's hear it for the botanical species. So right on. But Dwayne follows in this tradition, and he's done things like painted the whole Yellowstone to Yukon corridor. So he's covered, I don't know how many thousands of miles traveling up and down that corridor, but he really is able to demonstrate to us this power, this emotional connection to art. I was interviewing someone famous recently, and she said, art is like a symphony composition. It's one note at a time. And if you can string together words in the right order, or when you're painting, when you're creating this thing, you speak to the human heart. And you asked about Congress and laws and science. One thing that those things don't do is they really don't touch the heart. They don't speak to our emotion, because scientists supposedly aren't able to go to that place. And yet, we had the Murrays. We had Olaus Murray in Jackson Hole, who was scientist and artist. And so, again, I just want to plug your book. I think it's a really remarkable thing because, yes, there's a lot of art in there, but there's a lot of great science that inspires the art.
Indeed, yeah. Thanks, Todd. The information really was looking to integrate the science and the art together in this book, and I appreciate your continued kind words for the project. Dwayne, I'd love to ask for your opinion about what it means to you to hear Todd speak to the wolf. What do you get? What do you understand his hope for the future to be from his essay that he wrote to accompany your painting?
No, I appreciate that. It's a privilege to express my appreciation to my good friend Todd. I've known him for a very long time. I think that second to standing at the easel and doing the work that I do, I really enjoy reading. And Todd is a masterful wordsmith, and he's very knowledgeable. And all that is to say that the written word inspires me and gives me thoughts, perceptions, creative ideas that I might not have thought of myself, quite apart from standing in the field and garnering and absorbing the moods, the colors, etc. Reading works that touch the heart and the mind simultaneously, for me, is a great inspiration, because in that way I'm able to, in some cases, not by my own effort, but by reading, say, Todd's words, I'm able to think out of the box, think of something I might not have thought of before. And those types of things are very important from my perspective to inform the work that I do. And I think you'd probably find that many artists, at least the colleagues that I have, are great readers. They're great. They have a great respect for literature and profound writing. So in terms of, I guess, my brief geographic time, Todd is one of those esteemed writers that I feel very fortunate to be friends with, because I respect what he writes, and so it informs my mind and the pursuits of the work at the easel. So I think that's a great marriage of intellectual capacity joined with a creative pursuit from the heart. And I find that very powerful.
Dwayne, that is a very touching tribute to your friend. And what it tells me is that the two of you should probably find more ways to collaborate, because you both have this brilliance in your own way. And so let's bring that together. And while you're brainstorming what that's going to be, I'd love to move on to Sue and Susan and hear from these two women who, as I said, collaborated on the presentation of the Lodgepole Pine. So let's start with some introductions. Susan Marsh has lived in Jackson for over 3 decades. She writes poetry, fiction, creative nonfiction, and natural history. She has published a novel and 10 nonfiction books, including a memoir of her time spent working for the U.S. Forest Service in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. She's a skilled writer who has been recognized with many awards that have included a Creative Writing Award with the Wyoming Arts Council, the Sarton Women's Literary Award for Contemporary Fiction, and the Wallace Stegner Prize in Environmental Humanities. Susan is a regular contributor to Mountain Journal through her column, Back to Nature. Later this year, Susan's chapbook, The Earth Has Been Too Generous, will be published by Finishing Line Press. And Sue Cedarholm has lived in Jackson Hole for over a 1/4 century and gained recognition for her works with photography and paintings in acrylic and watercolor on paper, canvas, and silk. For the past 17 years, she has traveled the world as a photographer's assistant. She is the creator and artist behind Watercolor Diary, her effort to create 1 painting a day for a year that now has spanned well over 500 days. Her photographs have appeared in print publications, and she has served on several boards in the Jackson Hole community, including the board of the Grand Teton Association and the Art Association. It is a pleasure, Sue and Susan, to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much for making time. And just as before, we're going to be viewing now the painting that Sue created for the Lodgepole Pine, entitled Through the Forest. And while we enjoy this look, Susan is going to be reading from her essay. Susan, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I look at Sue's beautiful painting and I think of lodgepole as we typically see it in the Yellowstone area. But my essay is about a particular one that doesn't look normal and because of where it happened to grow. A tree that I especially love is one peculiar specimen of lodgepole pine. Among the most abundant of conifers in Yellowstone, this species is scorned by hikers seeking mountain scenery while having to trudge through miles of pinus monotonous to reach their glorious destination. Lodgepole is the backdrop of our region, not the star of the show. My favorite lodgepole pine is not straight and tall like those cloaking the Yellowstone Plateau or lining the roadside north of Coulter Bay. It is barely 10 feet tall and its branches reach out in a shrubby claw. Its trunk bows out and away from the slope where it once found purchase as a seed, above a cut bank along the highway north of Hoback Junction. Each year, the bank erodes a little more and rocks roll onto the pavement below while the lodgepole pine clings tight. Half of its roots dangle in midair and it looks as if it could topple at any moment into the northbound lane.
Thank you, Susan. I love this quirky lodgepole that you introduce us to in your piece, and I hope you can introduce me in person to her.
Okay.
So Susan and Sue, like Dwayne and Todd, you're both longtime Yellowstone residents who have been living, working, exploring, and creating in this region for many years. I'd really love to understand how formative experiences for both of you in this wild place influence your work and influenced your paths to pursue as artist and writer. And I'm going to start with Sue right now. Sue, maybe you can also let us know what you were doing before you joined us tonight that almost resulted in you needing to phone in instead of video in.
Well, thank you
Tracking
so much.
bears.
I'm so proud to be part of this book because it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I just got it, the first one on I think Tuesday, and when I opened it up, it's like, oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. But yes, I moved here in 1980, so I've been in Jackson and Greater Yellowstone for a very, very long time. But yes, this morning I was out. Everyone's probably heard of Grizzly 399, and she came out of her den 2 weeks ago, and we photographed her, and then she hasn't been seen for 2 weeks. And so I said to myself this morning, I said, she's going to come out today because I have to be on this Zoom call. And sure enough, she came out this morning and we saw her from a long distance away, but at least we saw her. She still has all 4 of her cubs and she's looking well. So it was just exciting to see her. But I had a friend that I was with and she's got a big camper van and they have Wi-Fi. And she said, don't worry, Sue, if we're up and something's happening, you can do your Zoom call from the van. So I was almost doing that, but I was like, okay, please, $3.99, just go away for a few hours so I can be on this call. So anyway, here I am, not in the van, but no, it's something about this area. I grew up in Colorado and spent all my summers in Rocky Mountain National Park, climbing and hiking and backpacking. And the first day that I came into Jackson when I was in college, I came here on a ski trip and I just was like, I have to live in this place. There's just something about this valley and that's just has inspired my art. And I didn't start painting till I first lived in Jackson. And it's just, when you're out hiking, biking, camping, whatever you're doing, there's just something that makes you want to share this place. And so that's what I try to do with my art, and trying to just share the essence of what I've seen and where I've been and the things I've been doing. So there's an aura about this place.
I would agree. With that. Susan, can you tell us a bit about your experiences in Yellowstone and how that influences your work?
Yeah, Well, as you mentioned, the work that I did with the Forest Service influenced some essays and then a book. But I think probably the thing that struck me most was the casual encounters I've had with wildlife, not the stand by the road and watch the wolves at their gathering site or some such, but just running into things that I didn't expect to. And watching their behavior and seeing how they're living their lives. And often, well, I would usually write about that in my journals, and some of that stuff made its way into published writing and some didn't, but all of it, it's just like I'm gathering all these little experiences that are at once kind of ordinary for this place, but also very spectacular and special to me.
Well, and those experiences all come through in the writing that I've been able to read of yours, Susan. That's clear that that's a major influence for you.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, maybe Susan, if you can just build on what you were just discussing, which is your process for translating these experiences in nature. Do you see yourself as a nature translator? Are you consciously, processing your experiences and infusing them with your values to get to some product on the other side? Is that more of an intuitive process? And how do you see your values and your way of understanding nature coming through into your work?
Well, I would say it's more on the intuitive side, unless I'm writing just natural history. And then it's more of a translation. But, I have these relationships with plants and rocks in particular places, a little, a corner in a trail that has a spot that I know because of some thing that happened there, usually. And all of that is pretty wordless when I'm experiencing it. So then when I'm going to write about it, of course, I have to try to translate it into some kind of words that make sense to someone else. And, I don't really work on that too hard to try to, the translation piece, but more to try to put the translation on the paper for myself, that I feel this importance about an encounter with this particular wildflower. And I remember seeing the same one in the same place on the same trail. And, it's like it's a friend. And so how do I say that in a way that doesn't really say it? I don't want to just write, I love this flower, because that's trite. So yeah, I just start writing and see what happens.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Susan. Sue, can you relate to Susan's process, or how do you go about your work?
No, I can totally relate to that too, because like Susan, when we've lived in a same place for a very long time, you do find, like, oh, there's that. I saw that last year. And I've been lucky enough to travel all over the world, and I've worked for Tom Mangelson. So I've been doing photography, and you come back from a photography trip, and then when you sit down and want to try to paint what you saw, whether it's here or Africa or wherever you were, what I try to just go into this place where I remember what it felt like to observe these things, and what it felt like. We were just at the Sandhill Crane migration, and Todd was actually there too. And it's just this thing that happens, and then you're like, how do I paint 100,000 snow geese taking off from a lake, the sound, and so you can't, and I can't do that with words because I am not a good writer. So I'm trying to do it with paint. And so the first thing I do is just take myself back to where I was when something captured my eye, whether it was, I paint from photos, but a lot of times I just paint from what I felt like. And so I'm just trying to get the essence of what I felt and saw and try to present that in my paintings.
Sue, do you feel like your values or your understanding of nature comes through in these final products, and how would you describe those values in nature?
Well, I think nature is critical, and we need nature, and anyway, even if nature for you is just going to a city park and you live in a city, but it became so evident last year with all the pandemic, and the Greater Yellowstone was just overrun with people because you can't travel anywhere else. So they came here, and I just talked to so many people who had never really been to this part of the country, and they were out seeing bears, or they were seeing wolves or elk, or, you know, whatever, even just like a little red fox going by. And people are just in awe of all of that. And I think it's the one thing about the pandemic is it made us realize that, you know, things close to home, or appreciating things we have around us more. But, you know, if to lose wildlife would be the end of everything. It's critical for humankind in general.
Well, on that note, I'd like to kind of bring us back to this big picture of what this book is trying to accomplish, which is to protect wildlife. Because I couldn't agree with you more, Sue. And you probably are a great writer because you're very articulate in how you describe all of these things. So what I'm interested in hearing from you, Sue, and Susan, and Todd, I'm going to bring you into this as well, but is how you see storytelling through art and writing as playing a role in protecting nature. And if you have thoughts as to how we could even better be advocates of and protectors of nature through our art and our writing. And Sue, if you want to just keep on, that'd be great. And then we'll move on to Susan.
Okay. Well, I think with the writing, I mean, the writers, you then get the vision in your head of what they're writing, so then you can see by their words. And with the artist, you are visually showing your thoughts, but all those things are just, you know, going to people's emotions. So if we can, whether it's your painting or a piece of music or a poem, or all that is just playing on people's emotions. And so that's how we can get people to really care about wildlife and care about the environment and want to conserve things. And so then when they do get to see these animals or these places, these mountains in real life, and they maybe first saw them in a photo or a painting, and they're just like, I want to go there. And then they come and they really appreciate the place. And then they're like, we have to save these places because they're so important. So I think that's what we're all trying to do, is just convey the emotional part of living in a place like this.
Susan, what do you think about that?
Well, yes, I feel the same way that Sue has just explained. But I also think, I remember, you know, I grew up in a place where there were a lot of woods around, and so I kind of had a natural affinity for wild things. But I also remember being very much influenced by things like the early Sierra Club books and calendars with these gorgeous photographs. Writers that Wallace Stegner and some of the others who wrote about the importance of these places and of wildlife and wildlands, and many of which, Alaska, for example, I had never been to, but I started getting this emotional attachment to these places because of the stories that were told by these writers and the photographers of the magazines. So I would look at my own place. I think it can be translated. You know, it's like, I don't have to go to the Brooks Range in order to love the earth. I can go to my backyard and find something there and try to protect it as well. So, you know, I think it can instill in you a basic reverence if you are so inclined.
Todd, what do you think?
I think about art, and I think that if art puts us to sleep, it's not doing its job. You know, what we do, we have to stir up the senses. And to be provocative, I don't mean to create controversy, but I think we should stimulate things. You know, David Brower said, no conservation victory is ever permanent. We're sort of fated to fight things over and over again. And I think we sit back and we think all is good. And I don't want to be political here, but, you know, can we go back into the past? We just went back a century in the past in the Northern Rockies here with some of the wolf bills that have moved through, where we never thought we would go back to actually taking a perspective where we're trying to annihilate animals that the American public has spent a lot of money rescuing and resuscitating. And that's not again, meant to be a political statement. It's a fact of what's going on out there. And so I want to come back. I don't want to make your face blush here, but this is the kind of stuff that, books like this should be in circulation. And however, you may respond to art, you may respond to the written word, but the point is, again, you've delivered the goods. Now people need to become engaged.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Susan, do you have follow-up on that?
No, I was just agreeing with what he said.
We don't disagree on much.
It doesn't seem like it, does it? Well, there's a kind of art that's called ekphrasis, in which we take a piece of art in a gallery and make a poem out of it or respond to it in some way. And I've done that a few times, and it's interesting what story you tell yourself when you see this painting or sculpture, and how it hits you emotionally as well as visually.
And Susan, that's a great lead into a question that we received about the process that I just thought I'd speak to. And the question was, what was the process of these artists and writers working together in collaboration? And what's interesting is that for the most part, everybody created their piece alone. I think in the case of Todd and Dwayne, because of their friendship, that was probably a bit more collaborative, but artists and writers did not necessarily know with whom they were going to be working on this project. And yet what I love as represented in some of the examples we talked about tonight, like the pica, both the painting and the poem for the pica, both have this energy that it seems like these things were created simultaneously or in unison. The same is true for the aspen and the lodgepole and the wolf, for that matter. And so I think that that's what's really special, is that we're talking about these different mediums to describe species, and yet we still come out with these stories that are unique and they're nuanced, but there's overlapping threads of what the soul is maybe of the species that we're speaking about. So yeah, anyway, I don't know if any of the contributors wish to speak to the process for this project in particular.
Yeah. Well, I will, just for a second, because Sue and I did not, we're friends and we're in the same little artists and writers group that gets together. So once in a while we'd say, oh, do you have any ideas, or, what are you thinking about? But we didn't know at that point, as either of us, as far as I know, what exactly we were going to do. But I think there's an element of serendipity when you don't, because otherwise it feels like an assignment. And if I knew what Sue was going to paint, I probably wouldn't have written the essay that I did, because it's not about straight lodgepoles, So I think that might be true for some of the other people as well.
And I think for me, I was the same thing. I just like lodgepole. So what does a lodgepole mean to me? Well, lodgepole, like you're talking, the forests in Yellowstone, they're just those straight lodgepole pines. But then there are those few forests that the trees are all dead from water, or I think they got flooded, but they're still standing there straight and tall and dead. So in my mind, it was just like, here's the creek coming through those straight, tall lodgepoles and how that feels in the forest. So yeah, I love it. Would have definitely been a different painting if I had read The Crooked.
Yeah.
I'm not going to drive down there and go look for that tree.
Oh, the highway department, part of the essay has to do with they're making it into a 3-lane, but they're taking off the other side of the highway. So I think the tree is going to survive.
Well, I want to be conscious of the time. I know we got started a few minutes late, but I know all of our participants and attendees probably have nights to get onto. And so I want to thank Todd and Dwayne. And Dwayne, unfortunately, I'll have to relay this message to him, and Sue and Susan, genuine thanks for participating tonight in the conversation. for being a part of this project, of course, but I see you all as giving voice to the voiceless, and that's the most important job in Yellowstone right now. And so thank you for the work that each of you do in that role. It's been an honor to work with you on this project. So what Ben and I have are just a couple quick announcements before we close. The first is I want to remind everybody that if you haven't yet purchased a book, and if you'd like to purchase a book in a way that's also going to be giving back to the Northern Rockies Conservation Cooperative, you can do that on Trinity University Press's website, which is tupress.org, using the promo code NRCC. And by doing that, the proceeds from your purchase of the book will go to the Northern Rockies Conservation Cooperative. Ben, will you give us a little update about what's happening at NRCC coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again to everyone tonight, but mostly to Katie for using her imagination to create this book. And it hit me when Todd said that this is adding to the canon of Yellowstone storytelling, and that's very correct, amongst a large and really important canon. But I wanted to make a quick announcement. The NRCC's biennial Jackson Hole Wildlife Symposium is still happening this year, but virtually. It will not be live content, but it will exist on our website. So I encourage everyone to go ahead and visit our website near the end of May to be able to watch and read on your own time. There's going to be a really fantastic series of keynote speakers from leaders around the region, some research and art updates from folks in the region, and some tributes to conservation leaders. I'm really excited about how it's coming together, so I just wanted to throw that out there for everyone to go to the NRCC website at the end of May to see our wildlife symposium. So that's it for me, and thanks to everyone who participated and attended tonight.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, I encourage everyone to check out the symposium. This is work that NRCC has been doing for many years now, and it's a place for great ideas and innovation. I want to mention before we sign off, because we will lose this little chat, that some of the contributors who are here tonight, they have put in the chat a little bit about their process. And so if you want to take a couple minutes to read the chat about some of the ways that the people who participated in this project experienced this and their process for creation, I would love to direct you over that way. But we are going to be concluding the event tonight. And if you have follow-up questions, feel free to direct them to me, and I can always send them out to the rest of the contributors. But it has been such a privilege to spend this last hour together. I said this at the beginning, I wish that we could be doing this in person, and yet it's hard for me to believe that we would have been able to join all together like this in person, as many people that are here tonight. That's just hard to do when you're talking about a 22 million acre region, as well as, of course, people from across the country who've been able to join and world. So thank you all for making the most of the Zoom platform. And when we see each other next, I will look forward to the hugs and the handshakes and the cheers and the dancing that is deserved for reaching this milestone together. And I just want to reiterate that the purpose of this project was to inspire awareness and affection for Greater Yellowstone. I feel inspired coming out of this conversation. Thank you so much again to the 4 participating contributors tonight for doing that. I hope that this book continues to do that for all who reads it. And with that, we will call it a night. Thank you again for joining. We're going to be having this posted on YouTube. It's been recorded, so if you need a link to share with others, stay tuned. But thank you again, and good night, everyone.
Thank you, Katie.
Yes.